What if you did everything right and still lost everything? This is not a hypothetical question, but the true story of a man named Job, a story that challenges our understanding of faith, justice, and suffering in ways that still resonate today. Imagine being a good and honest person, someone who helps others, loves their family, and lives with unshakable faith. Your life is an example of integrity and success, filled with prosperity, good health, a loving family, and the respect of your community. It sounds like a fairy tale, the kind of life people dream of and believe is the reward for doing everything right. But what if, without warning and without explanation, that entire world collapsed overnight? That is the journey we are about to take, because the story of Job is not just an ancient account. It is a mirror of our own struggles, especially those moments when life hits us hard and leaves us asking a single painful question. Why? Job lived a blessed life. The Bible describes him as a blameless and upright man who feared God and turned away from evil. He had a wife, 10 children, immense wealth, and a reputation that made him respected throughout the land. By every standard of his time, Job was a successful and happy man. Yet in a single day, an avalanche of tragedy destroyed everything he had built. First, his oxen and donkeys were stolen, and the servants who cared for them were brutally killed. Then fire fell from the sky, consuming all his sheep along with the shepherds. Soon after, his camels were taken, and once again, more servants were murdered. As devastating as these losses were, the worst news was still to come. A powerful wind struck the house where his 10 children were gathered in celebration, and the building collapsed. In a matter of moments, all of his children were gone. Every single one of them. Try to imagine that pain, losing everything you worked for and everyone you loved in just a few hours. Job's response was raw and human. He tore his clothes, shaved his head, and fell to the ground in deep mourning. Yet even in that unbearable moment, his words were not curses but worship. He said that he came into the world with nothing and would leave the same way, acknowledging that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, and still blessing the name of the Lord. What kind of faith produces words like that in the middle of such loss? And yet, Job's trial was not over. Soon after, his health was taken from him as well. Painful sores covered his body from head to toe, leaving him sitting among ashes, scraping his wounds with broken pottery. The man, once admired by everyone, was now avoided by all. Even his own wife, overwhelmed by his suffering, urged him to curse God and die. But Job refused. He clung to his integrity, holding on not because he understood, but because he believed there had to be more than what he could see. This is where the story enters a new and darker phase, not Job's silence, but God's. Job cries out, pours out his pain, and demands answers, yet heaven seems silent. 3 friends come to comfort him, and at first they do the right thing by sitting with him in silence for 7 days. But when they begin to speak, the situation only gets worse. They represent a belief that still exists today, the idea that if you do good, good things must happen, and if something bad happens, you must have done something wrong. Their message is simple and cruel. Confess your hidden sin, repent, and God will restore everything. They try to force Job's suffering into a neat theological formula. But real life is not that simple, and Job knows it. A long and painful debate follows, as Job defends his innocence not out of pride, but honesty. He does not understand why God is allowing this, and his pain becomes not only physical, but deeply existential. What hurts most is not the sores on his body, but the silence of God. He begs for answers and wonders where God is when he needs him most, a question that feels painfully familiar to anyone who has suffered loss, illness, or heartbreak. That silence can feel more devastating than the suffering itself. Job's friends continue accusing him, believing they are defending God, but in reality, they are crushing the heart of a broken man. They offer cold religiosity filled with answers but empty of compassion, showing how dangerous it can be to speak confidently about suffering we do not understand. Then, when all hope of an answer seems lost, something extraordinary happens. God finally speaks, not in a whisper, but out of a whirlwind. Yet his response is nothing like what anyone expected. He does not explain why Job suffered, nor does he reveal the heavenly events behind the scenes. Instead, God asks questions, one after another, pointing to the vastness of creation, the foundations of the earth, the stars in the sky, the power of storms, and the mysteries of creatures beyond human control. Through these questions, God reveals his infinite wisdom and sovereignty over a universe far more complex than Job could ever grasp. God's response is not an explanation, but a revelation. The message is not about why suffering happens, but about who God is. He is not humiliating Job, but inviting him to trust, not in a system of cause and effect, but in a personal and sovereign creator who remains in control even when life makes no sense. Faced with this overwhelming revelation, Job's perspective changes completely. He does not receive the answers he demanded, but he gains something far greater, an encounter with God himself. He responds with humility, acknowledging that while he had heard about God before, now he truly sees him. Job is not repenting of a hidden sin, but of trying to place God on trial, of demanding explanations from a wisdom far beyond human understanding. Then something remarkable happens. God rebukes Job's friends, saying they did not speak rightly about him, while Job did. Job's honesty was more pleasing to God than their polished theology. In the end, God restores Job's life, giving him double what he had before, along with more children and many more years to live. Yet this is not a simplistic, happy ending. Restoration does not erase the pain, and the scars remain. The children he lost did not return. The lesson of Job is not that suffering is always followed by reward, but that suffering is not always punishment. It teaches us to be careful with easy answers and reminds us that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is remain silent and present with those who hurt. Most importantly, Job invites us to ask a better question. Instead of asking why we suffer, we are invited to ask where God is in our suffering, and Job's story answers clearly. He is there, even in the silence, even in the whirlwind.